In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my blue baller build. This is an all-game build that uses the iron ball weapon, which is fists that I got to play around with in our fist video. Really like this weapon, and in this video we're going to go through how to put together using them. And I can read your mind right now. I know exactly what you're thinking, and you're thinking, Cass, why are you using the iron ball instead of the star fist? And obviously the answer to that question is for fashion, right? I mean, we have the blue baller build, and I just don't think it would look quite the same if we were using Starfist. Plus, we already did a build with a Starfist weapon a while ago, so I wanted to use something else. So that's why we're using the iron ball, or more specifically, the heavy iron balls. So there are some great things about this weapon, though, even though it's not the Starfist. First of all, it does incredible damage. It's probably like second in terms of attack rating when it comes to fist, just behind the Starfist. Doesn't have the bleed buildup of Starfist, so if you're really min-maxing this build, you would absolutely use that. But since we're not really concerned with that in this build, we're using the Iron Ball here. And you can get this really early on in the game as well. You can get this in Learning of the Lake by defeating an NPC there, so you can go and pick these up really quickly. And what I absolutely love about these fists is the sort of boxing-like nature that you have when playing them, but also that when you're using their charged heavy attack, you get a lot of stance damage from this weapon, and you can often stance break a lot of tough enemies in 2 charged heavy attacks. And when you're using the Stone Barb Crack tier to further increase your stance damage, you can do this on bosses with 2 charged heavy attacks, which is really fast, and then just kind of go to town on them while they're like laying on the ground, or continue to, do a critical strike or whatever you want. And I also really love the running R2 attack chain combo of this weapon. When you do a running heavy attack and then heavy attack and then heavy attack, it's actually much faster than you'd think, and it does a lot of damage, so highly recommend leaning into that running R2 when you're using this weapon type. And on top of this, I'm using the Academy Glintstone staff here, and really the reason for this is that we're buffing our heavy iron balls with magic, right? We're using the Scholar Armament here in order to give you more magic damage when you're using this weapon, so your total attack rating is higher than if you just went a physical infusion. And I realize it's split damage, but I like the look of it. I don't know, something about blue balls just has a nice feel to it. And so you're going to buff with this using your Academy Glintstone staff. The reason we're using this staff here is because our intelligence is like only around 50 for this build. If you go higher, you might want to consider a different staff. But for this point of the game, considering that I'm really only focused on using that spell, this is the best staff for that. However, if you decide to use other spells in this build, and you find a particular group of spells you like, you might be better off using a different staff. But if you're just kind of following this build exactly, this is the best staff to use in this case. So the general strategy then is that you're going to buff with Scholar's Armament, and then you're going to run in and, just running R2 a lot of regular enemies, or maybe go up and try and stance break an enemy, do a critical strike, something like that. Or, if you're fighting a boss or tough to kill enemy, you could run up to them, get a combo in on them, and then hit Endure when you know they're about to, rebuttal against you with an attack or a counterattack, and then poise through that and then continue striking them. You can either use a charged heavy attack again if you did one already in order to stance break them, or you can just continue your onslaught of, regular R2s or regular R1s on them. And also, the thing I love about Endure, besides the fact that it's going to prevent you from being interrupted, is that it reduces the damage that you take considerably. So you don't take a lot of damage with this build, because you can literally just tank through hits. Even if you know you're not going to be staggered by the hit, because you have significant poise, you can still hit Endure to tank the hit better and then continue to attack. And it's something that takes a little bit of practice, but once you get in the habit of it, it's absolutely deadly. And the nice thing about Endure, too, is it's an Ash of War that you can get very quickly from the War Master's shack up on Stormhill. So you're going to have the weapon and this very quickly in the game. And all you really need is any random staff in order to get going. And, if you played like an astrologer or something, you would probably have one already. So then armor-wise, you can really use any armor that's got 51 poise. You don't want to be interrupted while attacking. You can use Endure, but sometimes when you're facing regular enemies or bosses, you get in the thick of it, you're not going to want to interrupt it by pressing Endure. You want to keep swinging away, and this will allow you to do that. I just used an armor set here that gives me that kind of makes me look a little bit knightly. I don't know why, but you can really use anything that you want. I did go for a chest piece that had a little bit of blue in it. I feel like it matched my balls. So talismans-wise for this build, I have the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, the Axe Talisman, the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, and the Assassin's Crimson Dagger. So Rotten Winged Sword Insignia should be a no-brainer for this. You hit very rapidly with fists, so you're going to build up your attack power as you do that, and this is going to give you more and more damage. And this happens very quickly with this weapon type, so you're going to trigger this on the landscape and against bosses a lot. Now, if you went like the Keen Infusion, I would probably recommend Millicent's Prosthesis. This is less attack rating than Heavy with this weapon. This weapon scales better with Heavy, but it would allow you to contribute damage to your attack power with the 5 dexterity that you get from Millicent's Prosthesis and still get some attack power build up when attacking. So if you decide to go Keen over the Heavy Iron Balls, then you could consider using that instead. I have the Axe Talisman here because the charged heavy attack of this weapon is exceptionally deadly. You can get a lot of damage out of it. I use it quite regularly to stance break enemies, and so I just wanted to increase that damage more. And I use this even on boss fights a lot to stance break them, so I really like this talisman. You don't have to use this one. You could also use something like the Dagger Talisman here if you want, if you find yourself stance breaking and doing critical strikes on enemies a lot. And, there are other good talismans as well. We also have Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. This gives you more protection. You're going to have very high protection with this build because you're going to be wearing thick armor. You're going to be using Endure, but this gives you even more protection, which just helps you trade damage and just be really, really durable. And then I have the Assassin's Crimson Dagger. You don't really need this one for this build, but what I find happens is that a lot of times when I'm stance breaking enemies, I might trade damage to pull that off, particularly against harder enemies. And then when you go in for a critical strike, you just kind of heal yourself back up with this. And you don't necessarily need that because you can just top yourself off with a flask instead. But you can put something else here like Green Turtle Talisman for more stamina recovery. Or if you find that you're not trading damage much, like during certain stretches, you could use the Ritual Sword Talisman to get more damage. But I just find that I play very, very aggressively, and this allows me to just like keep healing myself without really having to do anything. And you could also replace it with Assassin's Cerulean Dagger if you want in order to get FP back when you do critical strikes. I just find that Endure is so cheap, and I only use it for specific enemies that I don't really have FP problems with this build. Attribute-wise for this build, we have 50 Vigor, 25 Mind, 25 Endurance, 50 Strength, 12 Dexterity, 50 Intelligence, 7 Faith, and 9 Arcane. You only need 8 Dexterity to meet the requirements for this weapon. I have 12 because I am a class that starts with 12, so I cannot go lower than that. You don't need any Faith or Arcane for this build. Vigor-wise, you want enough to be able to trade damage and not die. You'll probably want to take this up to 60 at some point. 50 is plenty here for what we're doing, particularly since we tend to tank through hits with Endure, and we have Dragon Crest, Great Shield Talisman, and Heavy Armor, so we're not really taking tons of damage anyway. Mind, we have 25 here, and this is just to be able to use Endure as much as we want and not have to worry about it. The amount of Mind you're going to want is going to depend on whether you're actually casting spells or not, right? Like if you decide to really hybrid this more and cast other spells, which you can absolutely do, and this build is totally set up for, you're going to want more Mind in order to be able to do that regularly. But right now, 25 Mind is probably a little more than you actually need for what we're doing. You could probably drop that down to 20, but I just kind of left it somewhere in the middle there. And again, if you want to cast spells, you'll probably want to take this up to like 30 or 35. Endurance-wise, I have 25. This will vary depending on the armor set that you're wearing, but you want to make sure that you're medium rolling and have good protection and poise. If you need more endurance in order to wear a heavier armor, definitely consider putting some more points here. And, you go through stamina a lot doing like the full combo when you're like R1 spamming or light attack spamming. So having more endurance also helps that out. And obviously intelligence is there to increase the damage with Scholar's Armament, and also if you're casting spells it will increase the damage, because higher sorcery scaling, etc. So that's really what we have intelligence for. So for Flask of Wondrous Physique, you could go a couple ways. First of all, the Stone Barb Crack Tier. When you buff with this in a boss fight, I think it lasts 30 seconds or so, you're going to be able to stagger bosses, most bosses that have 80 stance, in 2 charged heavy attacks. So you really want to go for that on some bosses, depends on the boss. But if you're going to go for a stance break on a boss, you want to try and do it quickly and then unload with a combo. If possible, you'll get way more damage than that, than a critical strike. Then you can use other ones like the Thorny Crack Tier that increase your damage as you repeatedly hit enemies, or you can use the one that increases your damage with charged heavy attacks, because again, even if you're going for stance breaks, you're using charged heavy attacks. So either of these is good. I find the Magic Shroud and Crack Tier just doesn't add as much damage, and you could use that one if that's what you have. But, I don't think it's super necessary. And also, Stamina Recovery is not a bad option. So there are a few different ones you can use here depending on what you have and what you've acquired. But I really like to make sure I'm at least using the one for Stance Break so I can Stance Break bosses more easily. And when it comes to Great Ruin here, you're going to want to use Radahn's for sure, because you don't have that crazy of a stat spread. You do have 5 of the 8 attributes that you really need points in, but that's borderline. Like, you could use Godric's early on, but I think Radahn's is better eventually. Just giving you more health and stamina, which are both good for this build. You don't really need the FP from it unless you're casting other spells. And maybe if you're spell casting, you might want to consider staying with Godric's. But those two are good. Radahn's is probably the better of the two. So that wraps up our blue baller build. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It's just like a really fun build to do. I really enjoyed the style of this build, if you will. It was pretty hard to get through the audio of this without laughing, so that's good. And then we have more Elden Ring content coming, obviously. Shadow of the Erdtree is nearing now. We're getting like 2.5 weeks away. We have the bows video, which I'm currently working on, hoping to have that out later this week. And obviously we'll continue on with builds and other, pre-Shadow of the Erdtree content, and then roll right into Shadow of the Erdtree. As always, if you have comments or questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will try and answer them as soon as I can.